The canine German Shepherd and the beautiful soldier host climbed the mountain, camped on the cliff, and then this happened. A breathtaking mountain climb, a fearless soldier with a past she rarely speaks of, and a canine German Shepherd named Titan, who had already seen more danger than most humans could handle. Together, they set off on what was supposed to be a simple weekend escape into the wild. But when night fell and the winds howled across the jagged cliffs, something happened that would test their courage like never before. Get ready for a story of resilience, loyalty, and a bond forged under the stars, one that neither of them would ever forget. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories like this one directly to you. The early morning air was crisp, the kind that bit at exposed skin and filled every breath with the raw scent of pine and earth. Captain Emily Carter adjusted the straps of her heavy backpack and glanced down at Titan, the imposing black and tan canine German Shepherd trotting confidently beside her. His military-grade harness glinted slightly under the dappled sunlight filtering through the towering pines. "Ready for this, big guy?" she asked, her voice low but warm. Titan responded with a short, eager bark, his sharp eyes scanning the rugged path ahead. Though retired from active military service, Titan still carried himself with the discipline and readiness of a soldier. Just like Emily, he wasn't the type to settle for quiet city life. Both bore scars, hers hidden beneath her sleeves and his under the thick fur that covered faint traces of past battles. The plan was simple: a weekend hike through Devil's Spine, one of Colorado's most challenging trails. It was notorious for its steep ascents and narrow ridges, but the reward was a view that could silence even the loudest mind. Emily needed that. Lately, the memories of old missions had started to creep back during sleepless nights. She thought maybe, just maybe, the mountains could offer some peace. By noon, the sun hung high and the climb became steeper. Titan led the way, his strong legs easily navigating the loose gravel and jagged rocks. Emily followed closely, admiring how his instincts remained razor-sharp. Every few minutes he would pause, ears perked, nose twitching at unseen scents in the mountain air. "Always on guard, huh?" she muttered, wiping the sweat from her brow. They reached the first major checkpoint by late afternoon. A narrow ledge known as Widow's Pass. Emily carefully made her way across, the sheer drop to her right, making her stomach tighten. One wrong step here, and it would be a long, fatal fall. Titan crossed first, his body low and steady, eyes flicking back to ensure she was following. As they cleared the pass, the landscape opened into a breathtaking plateau. Wildflowers danced gently in the breeze, and beyond them, the final stretch toward the cliff where they'd planned to camp for the night. Emily sat down for a moment, removing her pack, and gave Titan a well-deserved drink from her canteen. "You're still a better soldier than most men I served with," she said with a soft laugh, running her fingers through his thick fur. Titan leaned into her touch, his tail thumping against the dusty ground. They pressed on as the sky began to shift into shades of orange and crimson. Reaching the cliff just before sundown, Emily set up camp right at the edge, where the earth seemed to fall away into a sea of clouds. From up there, the world below looked small and distant, almost unreal. She secured the tent and gathered some firewood, while Titan explored the perimeter, ensuring their safety, even here in the wild. By nightfall, a small fire crackled, and the sky exploded with stars. The cold settled in quickly, and Emily pulled her jacket tighter around her. Titan lay close to her side, his body radiating warmth. Despite the beauty of the night, there was a tension in the air, a stillness too complete, a silence that didn't feel quite right. And then, it happened. Titan stood up abruptly, his ears straight, body stiff, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the glow of the fire. A low, almost imperceptible growl rumbled deep in his chest. Emily's heart raced as she reached instinctively for the hunting knife strapped to her thigh. Her soldier's instincts kicked in, scanning the darkened tree line. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Titan didn't move. His growl deepened, and that's when she saw it. Two glowing eyes reflecting the firelight from the edge of the shadows. Something was watching them, something big. And just like that, their peaceful night under the suns turned into something far more dangerous. The air seemed to freeze in place, the night growing unnaturally still. Emily's grip on the knife tightened, her knuckles white against the worn leather handle. She crouched low, her eyes locked on the faint glimmer of those two unblinking eyes in the darkness. Titan's growl became a steady rumble, deep and threatening, the kind that promised a fight, if it came to that. "Easy, Titan. Stay close," she whispered, barely moving her lips. Titan didn't need the command. He stood firm, his body slightly in front of Emily, shoulders squared, every muscle coiled like a spring. His eyes never left the intruder. Whatever lurked beyond the reach of their firelight wasn't moving either. It was a standoff in the wild, and time seemed to stretch endlessly. A sudden gust of wind blew through the trees, carrying with it the faintest scent. Titan's nostrils flared. His growl changed, less aggressive, more curious now. Emily caught the shift and stood slowly, her senses razor sharp. Then, the shadow moved. It didn't charge. It didn't run. Instead, it stepped calmly into the firelight, and Emily's breath hitched in her throat. It was a mountain lion, majestic, powerful, and far too close for comfort. Its golden eyes locked onto Emily, its body low, but not in an immediate attack posture. Titan tensed, his stance unwavering, but Emily raised her free hand slowly. "Hold, Titan," she breathed. The mountain lion stared for a long, tense moment before letting out a soft, low growl of its own. Emily knew the signs. It wasn't hungry. It wasn't hunting. It was curious and territorial. She took a slow step backward, pulling Titan with her by the strap of his harness. Titan resisted slightly, but obeyed. His trust in her commands was absolute, forged through years of shared danger and hard-earned loyalty. The mountain lion held its ground for a few more agonizing seconds. Then, with the grace only a creature of the wild could possess, turned and vanished back into the shadows as silently as it had appeared. Emily exhaled shakily, her shoulders finally relaxing. She crouched next to Titan, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it echoed in the stillness. "Good boy. You kept us safe?" she whispered, pressing her forehead against his. Titan licked her cheek, his body still alert, but slowly easing back to calm. They sat by the fire for a while, neither of them ready to return to the tent just yet. Emily tossed a few more logs onto the fire, watching the flames rise and dance against the night sky. She couldn't help but marvel at how Titan had stood his ground, unflinching, even when staring down a predator twice his size. That was the thing about Titan. He wasn't just a dog. He was a soldier in his own right. He'd faced down far worse in war zones, explosions, gunfire, and the chaos of battlefields. Yet here, under a blanket of stars atop a cold, lonely cliff, his loyalty and courage had never been more evident. Eventually, the night grew colder, and the fire died down to glowing embers. Emily finally pulled Titan into the tent with her, his large body stretched protectively by the entrance. She couldn't sleep, not after the adrenaline rush of that encounter. Instead, she lay there, listening to the sound of Titan's steady breathing, his presence as reassuring as the strongest fortress. Somewhere deep inside, she wondered if this trip was about more than just escaping her past. Maybe it was about confronting the wild places in her own heart, the fears she hadn't faced, the memories she hadn't laid to rest. And Titan, well, maybe he wasn't just here for protection. Maybe he was here to remind her that even the bravest warriors need someone to stand by them when the night feels too long. Outside, the wind howled once more against the cliff, but inside that small tent, with Titan by her side, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. But what neither of them knew was that the mountain had one more surprise waiting for them. And by dawn, their courage would be tested in a way they could never have prepared for. The first light of dawn painted the horizon in soft hues of gold and pale blue. But something felt wrong. The air was heavier, the winds sharper, and the usual morning calm of the mountains was absent. Titan was already awake, standing at the entrance of the tent, his ears pricked forward and his nose twitching furiously. Emily stirred from a restless sleep, her eyes immediately catching the tense posture of her loyal companion. "Titan, what is it, boy?" she whispered, crawling to the tent's opening. As she unzipped the flap and stepped out, a sudden, biting gust of wind nearly knocked her back. The sky above, instead of its usual clear, crystalline beauty, was layered with thick, fast-moving clouds rolling in from the west. Storm clouds. And they were moving faster than anything she'd ever seen in the mountains. Emily's instincts kicked in. Years in the military had trained her to read the signs of impending disaster, and this was bad. "Pack up, Titan. We've got to move, now," she muttered, already breaking down the tent with practiced efficiency. Titan responded instantly, circling the perimeter and keeping watch, his body alert to every sound. Emily's hands worked fast, adrenaline pushing her through the biting cold. Within minutes, their camp was packed, and she tightened Titan's harness, clipping on the safety lead she rarely used. But today wasn't a day for taking risks. By the time they started down the trail, the first cold raindrops began to fall. Fat, heavy drops that hit the ground with ominous weight. Thunder rumbled in the distance, deep and low, like the growl of a beast awakening in the belly of the mountains. The trail that had seemed challenging the day before now felt treacherous. Wet rocks glistened with the slick sheen of rain, and the narrow ledges became dangerously slippery. The gusts of wind grew stronger with every passing minute, howling through the canyons like ghosts of old battles. Titan stayed close, his powerful body steady despite the worsening conditions. Emily trusted him more than any man she'd ever known. But as they reached Widow's Pass, she felt her stomach twist into a hard knot. The ledge was barely wide enough for one person in clear weather. Now, with the wind howling and rain turning the stones slick as ice, it looked like a death sentence. Emily crouched low and whispered into Titan's ear, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. "Listen to me, buddy. Slow and steady. You eat. I'm right behind you. Don't look down." Titan took the lead, his paws moving carefully, testing every inch of the ledge before committing his weight. Emily followed, her hands pressed against the rock wall for balance, her boots slipping dangerously close to the edge more than once. Halfway across, a loud crack of thunder split the sky, and a blinding flash of lightning lit up the entire mountain. The rain poured harder now, and the wind screamed through the narrow pass like a living force, trying to throw them off the cliff. Titan froze suddenly, his body tense, staring ahead. Emily's heart stopped. "What is it? Move, Titan! We can't stop here!" she urged through clenched teeth. And then she saw it. A rock slide. Several large boulders had tumbled down onto the narrow path ahead, completely blocking their way forward. There was no room to climb over them, no space to turn back. They were trapped. Emily's mind raced. Staying put wasn't an option. The storm was only getting worse. Every instinct she had screamed for a solution, but the mountain had boxed them in. Titan turned his head toward her, his eyes calm despite the chaos around them. That's when she remembered. There was a hidden trail just below the ledge. Old and dangerous, rarely used, but it might still be passable. "Tighten up, Titan," she said, her voice shaking. "We're going under." With one deep breath, she lowered herself onto her stomach and began to slide along the narrow shelf just below the main path. The drop was sheer. Hundreds of feet of open air and jagged rocks below. But it was their only chance. Titan followed, his body low and movement slow. Rain pelted them both, and the cliff face was slick, but somehow, inch by terrifying inch, they made it past the blocked section. When they finally reached safer ground, Emily collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Titan pressed against her side, his body warm despite the freezing rain. "Good boy. You saved us again," she whispered, tears mixing with the rain on her face. But just as they thought they had escaped the worst, a distant, bone-chilling howl echoed through the storm. Titan lifted his head, ears high, his body stiffening once more. Whatever was waiting ahead, it wasn't the end of their ordeal. The howl echoed again, closer this time, cutting through the thunder and the relentless pounding of the rain. Emily shot to her feet, every muscle tense and ready. Titan was already standing in front of her, a silent wall of strength, his teeth bared slightly, a low growl vibrating through his chest. The storm had turned the once peaceful trail into a nightmare. Visibility was poor, and every shadow seemed to shift and move with the wind. Emily scanned the tree line ahead, her military instincts screaming that whatever was out there wasn't just another animal seeking shelter from the storm. This was something different, something watching, stalking. "Stay with me, Titan," she murmured, her hand instinctively resting on the knife strapped to her belt. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming rush of adrenaline. They pushed forward cautiously, navigating through the flooded trail. Every branch that cracked underfoot, every gust of wind that moved the brush sent Emily's nerves on edge. Titan stayed close, his powerful frame pressed near her legs, his eyes scanning the horizon like a sentinel. Another howl, this time unmistakably close. Then she saw them, 3 sets of eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness beyond the tree line. Wolves. Large, lean, and dangerously underfed by the look of their sharp rib cages and scraggly fur. The leader, a massive gray male, stepped forward, his lips curled back to reveal yellowed teeth. His eyes locked on Titan, sizing him up. Emily swallowed hard. She knew they were deep in wolf territory, but this close to a human trail? It didn't add up. Unless the storm had pushed them down from higher ground, desperate and hungry. Titan stood his ground, his tail raised high, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. He let out a bark so loud and sharp it seemed to cut through the very air. The wolves hesitated. Their instincts warred between hunger and the clear message Titan was sending. "Come any closer, and it will cost you dearly." Emily slowly reached into her pack, her fingers closing around a flare gun. It wasn't much, but it could buy them time. Her mind raced through their options, and none of them were good. They were exposed, cornered by the cliff on one side, and a desperate pack of predators on the other. She raised the flare gun skyward and fired. A brilliant red flare shot into the stormy sky, bathing the area in a harsh, unnatural light. The wolves flinched, their eyes reflecting the sudden blaze like twin torches. The leader growled one last time before turning, the pack slipping back into the forest shadows. But Emily knew this wasn't over. Desperation had brought them here, and it could bring them back. As the flare fizzled out above them, Emily turned to Titan, crouching low to meet his eyes. "You held them off, soldier," she whispered, her forehead resting briefly against his. "But we need to find real shelter before they decide to try again." Titan nuzzled her chin briefly before turning his attention back to the path. Emily stood and scanned the terrain. They were close to the old ranger station ruins, abandoned years ago but still standing. It was their only hope. "Let's move, Titan," she commanded, her voice firm despite the icy fear still curling in her stomach. The trek toward the ruins was brutal. Mud sucked at their boots and paws, and the path had nearly washed away in places. But they pressed on. Every sound from the trees kept Emily on edge, her hand never straying far from the knife. Finally, just as the last light faded completely from the storm-darkened sky, the ruins came into view. The wooden structure sagged under years of neglect, but it was shelter, and right now, it felt like salvation. They pushed inside, the door creaking on rusted hinges. Emily immediately set to securing the perimeter, barricading the broken windows with old planks and debris. Titan paced the room, his nose constantly working, ensuring no hidden dangers lurked inside. When they were as safe as they could be, Emily collapsed against the wall, exhausted beyond measure. Titan lay beside her, his body pressed close, sharing his warmth. She ran her fingers through his wet fur, feeling the tension finally begin to ease from his body. Outside, the storm still raged, and though the threat of the wolves remained, for now, they had found a moment of peace. And in that fragile calm, Emily realized something. She wasn't just surviving this mountain, she was fighting for something far greater. A life free from the chains of her past, a future that wasn't defined by her scars or her pain. And Titan, he was leading her there, one dangerous step at a time. But the night wasn't over yet, and neither were the trials they still had to face. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. Outside the fragile walls of the old ranger station, the storm continued to pound the mountains with a fury that felt almost personal. Thunder rattled the walls, and every flash of lightning revealed glimpses of the world beyond. Trees bending under the force of the wind, and sheets of rain that turned the earth to a muddy sea. Emily sat against the cold wooden wall, her knees pulled up to her chest, Titan's broad body lying against her side. His ears twitched at every sound, his eyes never fully closing. Despite the shelter, they both knew the danger wasn't over. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to rest. But the haunting image of those wolves kept flashing behind her eyelids. Desperation had driven them down from their usual hunting grounds, and desperate predators rarely gave up so easily. And then, as if the mountain wanted to remind them just how small and powerless they really were, the ground beneath them shuddered. Emily's eyes snapped open. Titan was on his feet in an instant, his body stiff, his nose lifted toward the ceiling. Another shudder, stronger this time, than the unmistakable sound of wood groaning under pressure. "Oh no," Emily breathed, scanning the old beams above her. Years of rot, rain, and snow had weakened the old structure, and now the storm was pushing it past its limits. "Titan, out, now!" she barked, scrambling to her feet and grabbing her pack. But before they could reach the door, a deafening crack echoed through the building as one of the main support beams snapped like a brittle twig. A section of the ceiling collapsed, sending dust and splintered wood raining down. Titan shoved his powerful body into Emily's side, pushing her toward the exit as debris crashed behind them. They barely made it through the door before another section of the roof gave way. The old ranger station was coming down, and if they had hesitated even a second longer, they would have been trapped inside. Outside, the storm hadn't let up. The trail they'd followed to the ruins was now a river of mud and debris. Emily looked around, desperate for an alternative, but the terrain had become a pens of fallen trees and unstable ground. And then, through the roar of the storm and the pounding of her own heartbeat, she heard it again, the howl. This time, it was closer than ever. Emily spun toward the sound, her knife already in hand. Titan positioned himself in front of her, teeth bared, his deep growl almost lost in the storm's rage. The wolves had returned. Through the sheets of rain, their shapes emerged, shadowy figures moving with deadly purpose. The leader, the massive gray male, stood on a ridge just above them, his eyes locked on Titan. The pack fanned out, trying to surround them. Emily's mind raced. They were exhausted, outnumbered, and with nowhere left to run. But then her gaze swept over the landscape and something clicked. She remembered an old escape route used by rangers years ago, an emergency cable bridge that crossed the ravine just beyond the next rise. It was risky, especially in the storm, but it was the only chance they had. "Titan, follow me!" she shouted above the wind. Without hesitation, Titan fell into step behind her as they bolted toward the ridge. The wolves, sensing their prey was escaping, gave chase. Their snarls and howls almost drowned out by the roaring wind and rain. They reached the ridge's edge just as the first wolf lunged from behind. Titan spun with lightning speed, slamming his body into the attacker, sending the wolf tumbling back down the slope. Emily scrambled toward the remains of the cable bridge. To her relief, it was still there, old, weathered, but standing. The cables swayed violently in the storm, and the narrow wooden planks creaked under the assault of the wind. She grabbed the first cable and started across, her heart in her throat with every step. Titan hesitated for only a moment before following, his powerful frame low and steady as he crossed the swaying bridge behind her. Halfway across, lightning split the sky directly overhead, illuminating the terrifying sight behind them. The wolves had reached the edge of the ravine, their eyes burning like tiny fires in the storm-lit night. But the wolves couldn't cross. The bridge was their salvation. With one final burst of strength, Emily and Titan reached the other side. She collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Titan stood over her, his chest heaving, but his eyes were still focused on the danger behind them. And then, as if the mountain itself decided it was time for the hunt to end, a massive landslide crashed down behind them, wiping out the trail and burying the ravine. The wolves disappeared behind a wall of falling rock and mud. Silence fell, not from peace, but from exhaustion. Emily sat back, pulling Titan close, burying her face in his soaking wet fur. "You saved my life again," she whispered through her tears. In that moment, she understood. Titan wasn't just a companion. He was her protector, her reminder that no matter how dark things got, loyalty and courage could always light the way forward. The storm raged through the night, but by the time the first fragile light of dawn crept over the mountain peaks, a heavy silence settled over the world. Rain had turned to a cold, lingering mist that clung to the trees like a forgotten memory. Emily sat in the damp grass, exhausted beyond words, her arms wrapped tightly around Titan's massive frame. Neither had slept, neither could. For hours, they sat in silence, their minds replaying every heart-pounding moment from the night before. The wolves, the collapse, the storm. It had all felt like a final test of their strength, and somehow, against all odds, they were still standing. Emily's eyes wandered over the landscape as the mist began to lift. The ravine behind them was unrecognizable, buried beneath tons of mud and rock from the landslide. The bridge was gone, shattered and swallowed by the earth. There was no going back now, but perhaps that was the point. She rubbed Titan's neck, her fingers brushing over the old scars beneath his thick fur. "We've both been through hell, haven't we, big guy?" she whispered. Titan leaned into her, his tail giving a slow, tired wag. It was then that she realized something had shifted inside her. For years, she had carried her past like a chain wrapped around her chest, tight, suffocating, unrelenting. But out here, against the wild, she had faced fears that no battlefield had ever prepared her for. And with every step, every danger, Titan had been there, never leaving her side. Slowly, she stood, her legs weak but determined. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting warm, golden light over the soaked landscape. Steam rose from the earth as the mountains exhaled, as if they too were relieved the storm had passed. "Let's go home, Titan," she said softly. Titan stood tall beside her, his body battered and soaked, but his spirit unbreakable. Together, they began the long journey back toward the base of the mountain. The trail ahead was unfamiliar, carved by the landslide and reshaped by the storm. But it didn't matter, they would find their way. Hours passed as they navigated through the wreckage of the storm. Trees were uprooted, and the ground was a chaotic maze of debris. But Titan led the way, his instincts guiding them down paths Emily couldn't even see. Along the way, they stumbled upon signs of life returning. Birds cautiously emerging from their hiding places, a deer drinking from a newly formed stream, its delicate legs trembling slightly before it darted back into the woods. Even in the aftermath of destruction, life found a way. By mid-afternoon, they reached a familiar clearing at the mountain's base. Emily recognized it instantly. It was the place where she had started this journey just days before. It felt like a lifetime ago. She dropped her pack to the ground and knelt beside Titan, her eyes glistening with emotion. "We made it, boy. We survived." Her voice cracked, and before she knew it, tears spilled freely down her cheeks, mingling with the dried remnants of rain and mud on her face. Titan licked her face gently, his soft brown eyes holding the same unwavering loyalty that had seen her through every battle, both on the battlefield and inside her heart. "You didn't just protect me out there," she whispered, pressing her forehead against his. "You reminded me that no matter how lost we feel, we can always find our way back. You gave me back my life, Titan." In that quiet moment, something deep and unseen settled between them, a bond forged through survival, courage, and the kind of loyalty that words could never capture. With the sun warming their tired bodies and the world slowly returning to peace around them, Emily stood and took one last look at the mountains. They weren't a place of fear anymore. They were a place of transformation. And as they walked away from the shadow of the cliffs and toward whatever new path awaited them, Emily knew that she wasn't running from her past anymore. She was walking toward a future built on the lessons she had learned in the heart of the storm. Titan trotted beside her, his tail held high, his steps light, despite the miles behind them. Together, they had faced the wild and survived. And now, it was time to start living again. The following days felt like waking from a long, heavy dream. The storm had passed, but its echoes still lingered in Emily's bones. Back in the quiet town at the base of the mountain, life had resumed its peaceful rhythm. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the storm that had nearly swallowed the cliffs, and about the brave soldier and her K9 companion who had walked out of it alive. Emily stood outside the modest cabin she called home, the porch creaking under her boots. Titan lay nearby, stretched out in the warm sunlight. His eyes half closed, but ever watchful. His fur had dried, his wounds cleaned, but the strength in his gaze remained as powerful as ever. She found herself watching him more often now, marveling at his resilience. Despite everything they had faced, his spirit had never wavered. In that, she found a mirror of her own survival. The town's sheriff, a kind-eyed man named Walter Briggs, stopped by that afternoon. His pickup truck rumbled to a stop near the fence, and he climbed out slowly, his weathered face breaking into a soft smile when he saw Titan sitting proudly by Emily's side. "He's quite the hero around here now," Walter said, tipping his hat. "Folks can't stop talking about how you two survived that mess up there." Emily crossed her arms, the faintest smile touching her lips. "We didn't just survive, Sheriff. We found something up there. Something I didn't know I was looking for." Walter leaned on the fence, his gaze distant as he looked toward the towering peaks in the distance. "Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the skies, Captain Carter." She nodded, her eyes following the same horizon. "Yeah. And sometimes you don't realize how much you're still carrying until it's almost taken from you." Walter pushed off the fence and offered a small nod of understanding. "Don't stay hidden out here forever, Emily. The town could use someone like you. And Titan? Well, that boy's a legend now." With that, the sheriff tipped his hat again and drove off, leaving a trail of dust behind him. Emily stood there for a while longer, letting his words settle. She looked down at Titan, who was now sitting upright, watching her with those wise, knowing eyes. "You hear that?" she asked softly. "You're a legend now." Titan tilted his head, his ear perked. Emily laughed gently, the sound foreign but welcome after so many days of tension and fear. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Emily found herself standing before a weathered mirror inside the cabin. For the first time in years, she looked at her reflection, not with regret or bitterness, but with quiet acceptance. The scars on her arms, the faint lines on her face, the weary eyes, they told a story of survival, of battles fought and won. Titan lay near the door, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes never far from her. "You ready for one last mission, soldier?" she asked, grabbing the old duffel bag from the corner of the room. Titan stood immediately, his tail wagging just once, as if to say, "Always." The next morning, they made their way to the local community center where a small group had gathered. Word had spread that Emily Carter, the decorated veteran who had all but disappeared from public life, was returning, not as a soldier, but as a mentor for the town's troubled youth. Titan walked proudly at her side, his presence commanding quiet respect as they stepped through the doors. Children gathered around almost instantly, their eyes wide with fascination at the imposing but gentle dog. Emily knelt to their level, smiling softly as she introduced them to Titan. "This is Titan. He's a hero, but he's also a reminder that even the bravest need a little help sometimes. And that's okay." As Titan gently nudged his head into the small hands reaching out to pet him, Emily realized she had finally found her purpose again. Not on a battlefield, not in the mountains, but right here, helping others find the courage she had fought so hard to rediscover. Outside, the sky was impossibly clear, the air filled with the scent of new beginnings. And as Emily stood among the laughter of children and the warmth of community, she understood that her journey with Titan wasn't ending. It was only just beginning. And this time, the path ahead was wide open and bathed in sunlight.